With real food, you cue the body's really exquisite satiety mechanisms to basically help you not want to overeat. When you eat real food of almost any kind, the body is fairly incapable of overeating because it is so well designed to essentially cue these hormonal satiety signals. It's when you start ultra processing food and just changing it and turning it into this different thing that you just basically override the body's ability to signal when it's full or not. In terms of things that people can do, I mean, I have to say the basic one, and the one that I would say is like foundational to above all others, is to focus on food first and to move away from all ultra processed foods like that. Mm-hmm. If there's, of all the things I know and have learned over the years, it's like if people could move away from the ultra processed foods. So essentially the refined processed sugars, the refined processed grains, and the refined industrial seed oils, and just eliminated those from the diet and moved towards more real food that's minimally or unprocessed. I mean, that's number one. And, it doesn't even really matter in my mind what the pattern is, whether it's carnivore or vegan or whatever. If you move in that direction towards eliminating the ultra processed foods, you're going to be doing better. And the reason for that is in part because unprocessed foods are going to give your body a lot more of the good stuff that they need for the cells to work properly. The micronutrients, the antioxidants, the polyphenols, the protein, just the basic building blocks that the body needs to function properly. The second piece is actually has to do with the sort of monumental overloading of the body that we're doing right now with substrates, essentially through ultra processed diets. With real food, you cue the body's really exquisite satiety mechanisms to basically help you not want to overeat. When you eat real food of almost any kind, the body is fairly incapable of overeating because it is so well designed to essentially cue these hormonal satiety signals. It's when you start ultra processing food and just changing it and turning it into this different thing that you just basically override the body's ability to signal when it's full or not. And this is why you don't see any obese animals, you virtually don't see any obese animals in the wild, because no matter what they're eating, there's plant-based animals, there's carnivore animals, there's omnivorous animals. They don't get obese generally because the body knows how to self-regulate, but only if it's eating minimally or unprocessed food. So, that to me is number one. And when people start moving towards a more whole foods diet, they tend to, see their glucose numbers do a lot better. But then there's a lot of refining that can be really, really interesting. And one that a lot of people notice is that is just like the impact of balancing their meals properly. So people really learn quickly wearing a continuous glucose monitor how making sure that there's adequate protein, healthy fat, and fiber in meals. And we might feel differently about fiber, and that's totally fine. But just in terms of if someone's spiking on a food that they love, if they can add in more protein, fat, or fiber, they will often see a big diminishment of that spike because of the way it's slowing digestion. The fiber may even be blocking glucose absorption from ever even getting into the bloodstream. And it also cues increased satiety. So they might actually eat less of the carbohydrates. People also find that food sequencing the meals a little bit differently can help. So actually, if you're going to be having sort of like a meal with all different macronutrients, eat the fat and protein earlier in the meal, eat the carbohydrates last. And that seems to also change the glucose response. So let's say you had a plate that was like a salad and then steak and then potatoes. What the research shows and what we also see in our data set is that if you start with like the steak and eat that first and actually give it a second to sort of digest and then maybe eat the salad, so starting to get a little more carbs and then eat the potatoes at the end, it would be a much different glucose response than if you ate the potatoes and then the salad and the steak. So that's kind of like a freebie, just like eat the meal in a different sequence. And then Another like really simple tactic that I would say most people wearing a CGM end up employing pretty regularly is taking just a brief walk after a meal. We see an almost 30% on average decrease in peak glucose response if people just take a simple, gentle walk after a meal. And the reason for this is because the muscle is a massive glucose sink. It's, when you activate the big muscle groups, which you're doing by taking a simple, gentle walk, that is just pulling in tons of glucose from the bloodstream. So there's almost nothing more exciting when you put on a continuous glucose monitor than after a meal where you start to see your glucose going up, just immediately throw your tennis shoes on and take a 20-minute walk and just see it come right down. So that's really, really motivating. And I would say speaks to a broader point, which is that...
Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
One of the things that I think the glucose monitors really engender is the value of actually moving more throughout the day in a low grade way. Like, it's not like you need to be exercising all day, but kind of moving away from this paradigm of like, oh, I'm just going to exercise for 45 minutes and that's my physical activity for the day, versus can you maybe walk a little bit, every hour throughout the day, even if it's 1 to 2 minutes, just get up, walk around, move around a little bit, keep the muscles active. Because then you're kind of creating a situation in the body where you're keeping your glucose channels at the cell membrane, like all day. You're keeping those GLUT4 channels at the cell membrane all throughout the day, kind of keeping the muscles taking up glucose. And that can have a really big impact on 24-hour kind of average glucose levels. So get up, do a few air squats, take a 1 to 2 minute walk. It just sort of constitutively keeps the glucose moving out of the bloodstream. Mm-hmm. In contrast, if you're someone who's sitting most of the day and then has their 45-minute or an hour workout in the evening, that's great. Or in the morning, that's great because you're getting some exercise, but it's a totally different physiology from that person moving a little bit every hour throughout the day because the times that you're sitting for 3 or 4 hour periods, you're basically not activating your glucose channels to come to the cell membrane. And so you're keeping more of that glucose in the bloodstream. So big takeaway for sure from our population and from the research is try to do like a little bit of low grade movement every half hour throughout the waking day. And you'll see generally much lower glucose patterns.
Okay. That's interesting, actually. I remember hearing about a study when they were looking at indigenous populations, sort of hunter-gatherer sort of things. And they were thinking, it was like, okay, are they more active? Or are they standing, walking, moving? And they found that they were fairly sedentary. They were sitting on average similar amounts of time as people in the West would, except that they were getting up about every 15 minutes. So they weren't just sitting down for 5 hours in a row. They were sitting down for 15, 20 minutes. They were getting up, they were doing something, they were sitting down again. And at least that researcher, I forget his name, but he's at Harvard. And he thought that was a major driver for their good health, or at least one of them anyway. And just that getting up and moving throughout the day.
It's so interesting. It is that I do think that probably is it, because there's been research that's sort of repeated this in the US literature. And there was one that was super, super interesting. It was a study where they basically took 3 groups of people, and what they did was they had people, so people were either doing a discrete 30-minute exercise period once per day, or walking 1 minute and 40 seconds every 30 minutes during waking hours. And so basically both groups walked for 30 minutes total per day, but one was split up into just like you're saying with this indigenous tribe, like a minute or two, like up and down, every 30 minutes, and vastly lower 24-hour glucose levels in the group that did the every 30 minutes. And so, theoretically they could have been, and in that study, they were sitting the whole rest of the time, but just that like popping up and getting those muscles to essentially be metabolically active and keeping that engine running throughout the whole day created a totally different situation in the body for metabolism. So that's an easy one to implement. Free, easy, not hard, and I would say definitely a big takeaway from what we've seen in our data set.
Yeah, great. I would say, with the fiber, I totally think that fiber is a good idea, depending on what you're eating too, because, like exactly as you say, and as I've seen Dr. Lustig say, when you're eating whole fiber, it makes a lattice and it blocks out about 30% of your absorption. So if you're eating a lot of carbs, you're just blocking out 30% of the carbs you're eating. So that makes perfect sense why studies would say that this helps with blood sugar control. Like I don't doubt it. It's like you're not eating 30% of the carbs that you're eating.
Freebie.
Yeah, exactly.
We love freebies. Yeah.
And so if you're eating things that you don't actually want to absorb, eat it with fiber. Great idea. I don't think I need it for me because I don't think I'm eating anything that I don't want. And so I want to absorb all that sort of stuff. But I do think in those circumstances, it would be a good idea.
It's actually sleep quantity, it's sleep quality, and it's sleep consistency. So quantity is basically the total number of hours that you're sleeping. And the literature shows that actually it's 7 to 8 hours time asleep that appears to be best for overall metabolic health. And it's actually a J-shaped curve. So meaning that below 7 to 8 hours, the risk of metabolic diseases go up sharply.